Donald Trump just issued a blank check to break the law in the name of Donald Trump. He is telling his supporters, do what you have to do in support of Donald Trump. I've got your back. You won't have to suffer the consequences that the law carries. It's really very chilling in this environment to think about what this could license these folks to do in the future.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. With each pardon Donald Trump hands out, he's sending that message loud and clear to his supporters and his backers that your criminality will be forgiven if you voted for me and remain loyal to me. That was former Department of Justice pardon attorney Liz Oyer referring to the dozens of pardons Trump dished out to his former aides for their efforts to overturn the 2020 election on his behalf. Trump essentially telling them, I've got your back if you, I don't know, want to try something like that again. Trump's weaponization of a president's ultimate pardon power on further display this week as he continues to hand them out like party favors to his political allies. We learned just today that he quietly pardoned the husband of a close GOP ally in Congress who pleaded guilty in 2013 to healthcare fraud and distributing a misbranded drug. New York Times is reporting that among those also pardoned were, quote, 2 Tennessee Republicans, the former House Speaker and a former top aide who had been sentenced weeks earlier on public corruption charges and were scheduled to report to prison later this month. This abuse of the pardon power not only undermines the rule of law and the justice system that Donald Trump ostensibly now as president sits atop, but there's also a disturbing portrait of America being painted in the permission structure for criminality that Donald Trump has ushered in. It came into focus this week when a felon whose sentence was commuted in the final hours of Donald Trump's first term was sentenced again for more crimes to 27 months in prison. New York Times reports this, quote, the sentencing of the man, Jonathan Braun, who had a long history of violence, demonstrates how Trump's handling of pardons and commutations has allowed some convicts to return to criminality. Braun, despite receiving a commutation from Trump, was still on supervised release, but prosecutors said Braun had continued a pattern of violence, including sexually assaulting a nanny, swinging an IV pole at a nurse, and threatening a congregant at his synagogue. He was also accused of assaulting a 3-year-old. New York Times adds this, quote, Braun's case demonstrates how Trump has eschewed longstanding Justice Department process of formally reviewing clemency applications instead of handing out pardons and commutations in a freewheeling manner, unlike any previous president. If there is any doubt that Donald Trump doesn't always know or care about who he's even handing pardons out to, here's what he had to say himself when asked about the Binance cryptocurrency tycoon who Donald Trump pardoned.
He pled guilty in 2023 to violating anti-money laundering laws. Right. The government at the time said that CZ had caused significant harm to U.S. national security, essentially by allowing terrorist groups like Hamas to move millions of dollars around. Why did you pardon him?
Okay, are you ready? I don't know who he is.
You ready for this? It's good. I get no bleeping clue who he even is. That's where we start the hour. Some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times investigative reporter, MSNBC national security contributor Mike Schmidt is here at the table. Also joining us, New York Times correspondent Teddy Schleifer. Also joining us, former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann. Andrew Weissmann, just level set, not just what is normal, but what is happening, because it seems that Donald Trump, after receiving the Supreme Court decision on immunity, is seeking to spread that immunity all across his political coalition. What do you see in his use of the pardon?
Let's take what's normal. What's normal is in Republican or Democratic administrations, there's a process to make sure that you are not pardoning somebody for an exceedingly violent crime, somebody who has not taken responsibility for their actions, for people who are likely to be recidivists, who are going to commit crimes again, and that you are treating people equally. And none of that is happening here. One of the things that I would add to the litany that you started with is the odor of grift here, where the amount of money that's going to PACs and people who are then getting pardons, suggests this is just completely antithetical to the rule of law. I would ask viewers to think about the following hypothetical. What would you expect the pardon power to look like if you had an autocrat in the White House who is also a convicted criminal? Would you expect hundreds of people who attacked the Capitol at your behest to be pardoned? Would you expect political cronies to be pardoned? Would you expect CEOs, really rich people who could give to your campaign, to be pardoned? Would you expect political corruption of all sorts to be pardoned? Because the last thing you want is for prosecutors to be seeking to hold politicians to account for corruption. Well, all of that has happened. All of those types of people have been pardoned. And it's something that is legal, but is because of the Constitution, but is a gross, gross abuse of power and is antithetical to the rule of law.
The pardoning of people who are violent, Mike Schmidt, seems to be a Trump-specific use of the pardon. People who are violent up to the moment when they're pardoned. And in the case of Jonathan Braun, who you read about, was violent before Trump pardoned him the first time, went on to carry out violence, including against a 3-year-old, is now going back to jail. What can you tell us about this one case and this one Trump pardon recipient and his history of violence?
So we found out as soon as Trump was leaving office that he had commuted the sentence of this guy, Jonathan Braun, the first time. And we were really surprised by that because he had a violent history that was as clear as day from the docket. If you had read the court papers.
Like what?
That he had basically beat an underling with a belt, that in the course of this investigation into him, in which he was ultimately convicted, over 10 years ago, he had beat an underling, with a belt who had done something wrong. So we were surprised that
like in his work or in his family?
As a drug dealer. He had taken off his belt. He had gone out to California. Someone who had worked for him had made a mistake, and he had beaten him with a belt. There was another instance where he'd been accused of throwing someone off of a deck. And these were all out there. And he received this commutation. So we wrote a story about it because we're like, wow, isn't this crazy that this person who has a violent history had received a commutation? We later found out that he was able to use a connection to the Kushner family and hiring Alan Dershowitz to get his application before the president, and that there had been no true Justice Department review of his case. We also found out that by giving him a commutation, they had actually hurt an ongoing SDNY investigation because SDNY had been trying to flip him and get him out of prison so he would cooperate in this other investigation that they were doing. By commuting his sentence, they removed all the leverage over him and the investigation floundered. So even before he came out of prison and was given, freedom by Trump, it was something that really, surprised us. Fast forward, he was arrested at least 5 times since he was set free by Trump. He was also accused by a judge of making these essentially illegal loans to cash-strapped small businesses. And the thing that surprised us in the reporting is that we kept on reporting about these different times that he was getting in trouble with the law, but no one was doing anything about it. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn wasn't doing anything about it. The judge wasn't doing anything about it. And it was only when the crimes became truly egregious did they step in, because he was still on supervised release. Even though he had received a commutation, he was still, essentially on probation. And finally, someone in the Justice Department said enough's enough, and he was thrown back in prison last year. And then yesterday he received this 27-month sentence.
It seems that some of the violence that he carried out was against people that he knows, including a 3-year-old. What do we know about his victims?
He was accused of assaulting his father-in-law, who was trying to protect his daughter, Jonathan Braun's wife, as he tried to attack her. He was accused of attacking her. He was accused of assaulting a 3-year-old. He was accused of sexually assaulting a nanny. He was accused of taking an IV pole and trying to hit a nurse with it at a hospital. those are just the ones off the top of my head. There was, like, you didn't need to be a criminologist or a federal prosecutor or anyone to see the pattern of behavior that was going on. And now he's, is going to be in prison for the next 2 years. The
insanity that Donald Trump ran on fighting crime when this is who he pardoned is just gobsmacking. What is the impact, Andrew Weissmann, on holding accountable someone that the President of the United States, past and current, has pardoned? I mean, is that why he was left roaming the streets, physically harming and threatening the people closest to him?
Well, just think about the message to the Department of Justice right now with what's going on with sort of retribution and vindictive actions, not just prosecuting people, but also the firing and demotions. And so if you are in the department and somebody has been pardoned or had their sentence commuted, you're going to think long and hard about whether you're going to do something about it. Carol and Aaron, in their book Injustice, talk about that and report about the effect on the FBI of the kind of abuse that happened during Trump 1.0 and how sort of cowed and scared the FBI was to take on what would normally be normal investigative steps. And so when you see this, that is the biggest concern you have, is that these things are being handed out willy-nilly, and it sends the message that Liz talked about at the opening of this segment, which is that you really are saying that you have a green light to go forward. It puts a lot of pressure on state prosecutors to be picking up the slack here, because remember, a federal pardon cannot in any way, shape, or form affect what a state does if the person has also violated state law.